to the NABS Now podcast, brought to you by the National Association of Blind Students, a proud division of the National Federation of the Blind.
Welcome to the NABS Now podcast. What comes to your mind when you think of a month of February? I know what you're thinking. For many of you, and for many cultures, February is traditionally associated with the month of Valentine's Day, spending time with your partner, intimate relationships, and romance. So that's what this episode is all about. We have two highly knowledgeable blind students in the use of dating apps, accessibility, usability, safety tips, and so much more to talk about on this episode, as these two get to share their experiences. Oh, and keep your ears out, as I do have special co-hosts who have joined me for this episode. I'll go ahead and let her introduce herself.
Online dating platforms such as Tinder, Bumble, and Hinge have been taking the world by storm and changing the way that we think about finding love. It's really interesting to look at how these different platforms has revolutionized how we think of meeting people and connecting with one another. On this episode of the NABS Now podcast, we are joined by two highly knowledgeable people on this topic to guide us through how exactly blind people navigate this completely digital space. My name is Manahil, Jafri, and I'm one of the co-hosts for this episode, and I can't wait to dig into this topic.
Shawn Abraham, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Shawn Abraham. I am a senior at University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and I'm majoring in political science. My hobbies include fashion and writing, and I love being involved on campus.
Awesome. Thank you, Shawn. Rachel, welcome to the podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, Seyoon. Hi, my name is Rachel Wee. I am a senior at UNC Chapel Hill, majoring in global studies with a minor in Japanese. Some of my hobbies include cooking, eating, and sleeping.
So let's talk about the process of diving into the use of dating apps. What does that look like? Where does it start? Walk us through the process of putting your best foot forward. What does it take to stand out?
I would say that in terms of putting your best foot forward, I think that dating apps are a part of broader dating life. It doesn't need to be the only thing you do, for sure. I would definitely encourage everyone to try to be active socially and try to meet people in person. I think dating apps can definitely be a part of that. When it comes to a profile, I would say that basics are the basics for everyone, regardless if you're sighted or not. Taking good pictures, just putting together a good profile, whatever the app is. If it's like witty little prompts that you need to write, just thinking about those, picking the ones that you think are the funniest, or just representing yourself in the way that you want to be represented. So on Hinge, for example, there's a lot of prompts you can pick from. If you want to make jokes and you want to be playful, you can be more funny. If you want to talk about things that you actually want, like, oh, what are my passions in life? What are my goals? You should do that.
So you would say the key is to authentic as you possibly could?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I would say that definitely being true to who you are and putting like your strengths forward is going to be the best way to do it. Like it is for any other person, taking the best pictures, putting together the best profile, asking your friends, people you know for feedback, getting other people to help you take pictures if that's what you need would be the best thing.
Rachel, would you like to take a stab at it?
For me, I would definitely say, as this world is very visual, to really make sure that you take good pictures, but you also show that your true selves, perhaps a picture of you doing your favorite thing, whether it's hiking or whether it's cooking or doing Pilates, just showing who you are and making sure that the other person understands what you like and what you don't like. Perhaps you can go deeper into conversation about those things later on.
I love that, Rachel. And I think one specific thing that you said is it is such a visual world that we live in, right? So on that note, I'd love to ask you guys, on your dating profile, do you disclose your blindness? Do you maybe pose in a picture with your cane or guide dog or mention it in your bio somewhere? How do you go around disclosure initially before you start the conversation?
So I am a guide dog user and I rarely use my cane. So for me personally, I very subtly disclose my blindness. I do not put it in any of my prompts when it comes to the wording itself. However, for example, I use Hinge, and we have 6 pictures that I can lay out. And in one of those pictures, I have a photo of me and my guide dog, Choi, posing in front of the Golden Gate Bridge. And he has his harness on, which says guide dog. So if someone looks very closely at my guide dog, or at that picture specifically, they would know that I am blind, or at least am affiliated with the blind community.
Shawn, what about you?
So disclosure is a very personal thing, and I think it's different for everyone. So when I first started, I definitely didn't have it in my pictures at all. Didn't have it in my bio. And I think it's because I knew on some level that if I did, people would swipe on me less. And I was scared of that. But then I realized that when I started matching with people and tell people that I was blind, when it came to that point, people stopped talking to me. It happened a couple times. So I was like, okay, I really don't like this. Let me try to put it in my bio. So I did. And I feel like, you can mention it in like a clever way or a funny way. And I still feel like people didn't really notice. So then I was like, okay, I got to go all in. And so basically now at this point, I have my cane in pretty much every picture I take. And then I just mention it in my prompts because Hinge has prompts. I say something like, LOL, I'm blind. So if you're into blind dating, ellipsis, which most people think is really funny, actually. So
no, that's clever.
Now that I do that, yes, I think that probably overall, I probably do get less swipes. But it's very interesting because the people who do swipe on you will know right away. And those are honestly, in my experience, people that are really open-minded, people that are really cool and fun to get to know. Over the time that I've done this, I honestly forget that I used to have it the other way. But I think it's genuinely a personal choice and different for everyone.
Yeah, fascinating.
I think that's really interesting, Shawn, because for me, I choose to explicitly disclose that of my blindness after someone swipes on me and we start having a conversation, because for me, I think it's really important to understand how we vibe together first, and then that might be a sacrifice of talking with that person if they aren't cool with my blindness, but that is a sacrifice I do have to take.
Yeah, you're right. You can disclose at many different points, like right when you match with someone, once you've talked for a while. I think the reason that I tried to make it so explicit was because even when I had my cane in my profile, even now, there are people that genuinely don't know that I'm blind from looking at my pictures. So I just try to make it as clear as possible now. And I think it just causes the least anxiety or thinking about it ahead of time. So that's just what I...
Two very different approaches here. And then I would also add with a follow-up, either of you received any comments or any direct or indirect even responses related to that blindness disclosure? And if so, how were they? Like, were they more questiony? Any skepticism perhaps about you as a person? I'm just curious to hear that side of the perspective too.
So for me, when it comes to the initial matching process, I have had no one realize that I am blind, but they have noticed the presence of my guide dog, but they do not realize that he is a guide dog. So sometimes they just say, "Oh, that's a cute dog." And then to which I respond with, "That's a guide dog." And then many times some people may ask, is that your guide dog, or is that a guide dog you're training? What's your affiliation with this guide dog? And then with their curiosity, I'm able to really disclose my own disability. Sometimes people are really cool with it and they just want to know more and ask questions. Some people are cool with it and don't ask any questions. And we go through the next phase of the dating process, which is meeting up in person.
It's very subtle, but also it keeps the curiosity going. And I think that's the part that has worked really well for you. And as Shawn said earlier, it's about how you choose to handle it. And that's what I wanted to hear from both of you, really, is to get different perspectives of handling blindness well and then presenting yourself in that context. What about you, Shawn?
Well, I think it's funny because sometimes, a lot of times people may not even notice when they match right away. Because the way that dating apps work is that people swipe so fast that they might just look at you and they might come back to it later once their actual conversation starts. So I definitely think when that happens, I think the negative responses I've gotten were mostly before I was so explicit about it. People will ask questions about it. Sometimes people don't ask at all. Just like in real life, people are too nervous to. But they'll ask if I mention it, how I do certain things. And I'll answer. It definitely does suck sometimes because you know that because of your blindness, someone knows that you're blind, that they're going to judge you on it. And you don't necessarily have your personality to show them. There's literally words on a screen that people are interacting with. So it's not like you can drastically change their mind. But I've definitely had a lot of positive interactions. I've met a lot of really cool people on these dating apps because they were willing to swipe on someone who's blind. And I made actual really cool friends through it.
See, and I really love that you mentioned the connectivity that dating apps can provide and also the differences between front end disclosure as well as waiting to disclose. And I think that's really interesting to look at the different approaches. And speaking on the approaches you take on dating apps, I would love to ask you guys, what exactly are your approaches in swiping through dating apps? As we mentioned, a lot of it is very visual. People have their pictures over there, and usually people just swipe left to right through them. How do you guys go about trying to find matches and swiping through various different types of apps? Do you think it's accessible? What's your guys' process?
What I do at this point is that I usually just read through the profiles with the prompts. And then once I match with someone, and if a conversation actually starts, then I'll ask other people in my life, friends of mine that I trust. They can describe people's pictures, what they look like. I think that asking other people for their opinion or looking at dating apps with your friends is something really common that people do in college. So it's not really a big deal to do. But I do like to wait until if I think that there's actually going to be a conversation before I ask people. One thing that I do is I will sometimes use Ira to look at pictures or even Be My Eyes. I actually think it's really helpful. People have told me they think this might be really awkward or weird, but I think that it's not really that strange to say, hey, I'm talking to someone on a dating app. Can you describe these cool pictures to me? And honestly, people love doing that. Even on Be My Eyes, I think I've done it a couple times. But definitely on Ira, I like Ira because it's professional for that. People love helping out with that as well.
I've never heard that before. And I think that's definitely a great takeaway and such a unique way to really try to make these dating apps experience as accessible as possible. Rachel, what about you?
I use a very similar approach as Shawn, where I look at the prompts and see what kind of humor they have, what their hobbies are, and really understand what they like to do in their free time, etc. One other criteria I do add is location, because as a person who does not drive and lives in a location with not very great public transportation, I think it's really important to be able to have access in meeting up with someone frequent basis if the relationship goes further. And as for physical aspects, I do sometimes have people who I trust, such as like my best friend or even my mom, to swipe for me because they understand what kind of physical characteristics I do and don't like.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was one of our talking points too, being able to advocate for sighted assist, just to make sure that those photos you're looking at on their profile, it really matches the type and descriptions that you're looking for. So way to go, Shawn, about using the tools that you got to maintain that strong independent skills you got there.
I think the location thing is really important because the main point of a dating app is to meet people in person. I think this trips people up a lot. I mean, I've definitely have been tripped up by this, but it's really easy to just talk to people and keep doing that. But genuinely, the real point of a dating app is to meet people in person. For some people, that means that dating apps may not be the right thing at this time because, for example, at my school, no one really uses the app that I use a lot now. It's kind of harder to meet people in person. And so it may just not be the right time or place to use it, especially with everything being so visual.
I also wanted to add that there are some dating apps that uses AI to understand what you like physically and don't like physically. So they will give you a queue of people who meet the physical characteristics that you are looking for. So in those cases, I'm not sure how well those AIs work, but I think it's a really great avenue to look into as well.
So obviously another thing is that while location is one thing you can use to filter people, I think that it's very important to consider that it also really depends on what you're looking for, both in someone that you're wanting to date and also just in general, whether it's a long-term relationship, short-term relationship, something casual, even friends, which people do on these dating apps for sure. Hinge, for example, has a lot of filters that you can filter people by. You can say what you're looking for. There's short-term, short-term open to long-term open to short-term, I don't know. And so that's the beauty of dating apps, because they do match you up. It's an algorithm and it does match you up with people who have the same preferences. Now, sometimes it's interesting because I think in real life, we can fall for people that aren't necessarily our preferences that we sort of list. But that's the one cool thing about dating apps. It's something to be aware of.
I completely agree. And I think both of the points that you mentioned, both of you, are really important in mapping out this dating landscape for blind individuals. And going off that point, we spoke briefly before about disclosing blindness in the initial picture swiping stage when people first see your profile. Now, I'd love to hear about if you guys had any experiences meeting up with people in person and how your blindness maybe affected or did not affect those types of experiences.
So, as I mentioned before, I live in a location that doesn't have great public transportation, and on these dating apps, I think safety is one major key point to keep in mind of. So when it comes to meeting people, number one, never get into someone's car without talking to them extensively. And usually that doesn't happen before meeting up. So I do work to meet up with them during the daytime, as well as meeting up with them in a place where it is within walking distance from where I live. So that if the date doesn't go well, I can walk back to my place alone.
Yeah. I feel like that is so important, especially as a female and as a blind individual. Safety is definitely a number one priority when it comes to these apps and making sure everything goes well. Shawn, what about you?
I agree. I think that as a male, I have the privilege of not having to think about that all the time. It's honestly not something I usually think about, physical safety, that is, with meeting up with someone. So I can't really comment on that. I just think that everything that Rachel said, I agree with, and I think is important.
I think one of the things that Rachel, you made a point about meeting up a place that is relatively close to your home. I think one thing of word of caution there is there could be a potential risk. Would say when you decide to walk back that they could potentially watch where your place of residence is. So that's definitely something for sure to be aware of.
One more thing I wanted to add is that for me, I try to meet up with someone, if it is a lunch date or a dinner date, is to meet up with them in a place where I have been to. So I know the layout of the restaurant and I know where the bathroom is, I know where the exit is. So things don't get as awkward as meeting up in places where I have no idea where anything is.
And going off a similar point that you mentioned, Rachel, I feel like a big thing for us is oftentimes when people do see us in person, we often get bombarded with people trying to help us, people trying to do things for us, right? This people feeling that they're like responsible for us in a sense. I think dating apps, though, in any online relationship, really, why it's so interesting is that you kind of know this person a little bit beforehand. And even though maybe you did disclose, sometimes the vibes and how people come across in person might be slightly different. Have you found that when you do maybe meet people in person after maybe disclosing online or anything like that, they are maybe overly attentive, overly helpful, or kind of give that vibe? Or do you think when you do disclose to them and have conversations, they are more allowing you to be more independent?
I always disclose before I meet anyone in person. And sometimes before I meet, they ask me if I need any help with anything, if I need them to if they need to walk slower, if walking through a park. But it's always easier said than done. So when sometimes I meet these people, it's a bit awkward because it might be their first time meeting up who is blind and they might not know what to do. I've never had any experiences where they have been pushy or overly aggressive in terms of helping me with my disability.
I agree with Rachel that I always disclose before we meet up. But again, that may not be what everyone wants to do. I mean, for me, if someone doesn't understand by my profile, then I'm probably not going to say anything until we meet. But I think that part of the help thing comes with what we just talked about earlier, which is just feeling comfortable and confident in the place that you're going, which may not always be what you're able to do, but trying to pick a place that you know well, that maybe is on your campus or near it. I think that's important for sure. And then just, yeah, trying to set those boundaries in the beginning of saying, hey, like I look, I appreciate it, but I really don't need help with this. And if people continue to do it and they just don't seem like they're getting it, I mean, it's a first date, and that's why you don't need to have a second if you don't want to.
Yeah, I think all of those tips are really important. And as someone who also dabbles in dating apps from time to time, I think those are definitely some tips that I can take away. And I hope our listeners back home can do so as well.
So I know we covered a lot of talking points so far on this episode, but let's also talk a little bit about different platforms. I know we talked a lot about algorithms and usability, perhaps being able to interact with swipes. How would you all rate the accessibility of various platforms that are out there? Maybe some of the big popular ones?
My favorite is Hinge because I truly do feel like it's the most accessible. I've tried Tinder. It's okay, but also it's very visual. People don't really use bios or put words as much in, which is how you know it's a more short-term focused dating app too. Usually the less words and stuff there are. But I like Hinge a lot. I think Bumble is okay. I've heard Coffee Meets Bagel is good, but I'm not entirely sure.
Yes. Love that one.
But I don't know about the accessibility of it too much. There are some ones that I've tried that are really inaccessible, and it's annoying because I like them. But
Sounds very on par, Shawn. I would completely agree with everything you've said, and I really don't have anything to add to that.
I will say, to make things a little bit more accessible, there are a couple things you can do. Just typical things I might recommend with apps in general, but if buttons are unlabeled, like on Tinder, you can, with an iPhone, double tap and hold to relabel. I remember the settings app button a long time ago. I couldn't click on it with Tinder, so I would just turn off. I would figure out where the button was, and then I would turn off voiceover and just tap it. So just simple things like that can go a long way. And the other accessibility part of it is uploading pictures, which I have found hard to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so really, I just have to get friends to help with that.
Or using tools like Ira and Be My Eyes, as you said earlier, to just like how you would evaluate others' photos, you could also take a great selfie, potentially.
Yes, that's very true.
Exactly.
Yeah, totally. And the built-in camera app on your iPhone does have a really good alignment tool as well. It'll tell you that your face is centered and then your phone is level. So that could be something worth trying as well.
So again, thank you guys so much for joining. I just want to quickly ask if you have any final thoughts on, the landscape of dating apps and kind of any recommendations you have for our listeners of what they should do if maybe they're like nervous and like downloading one, or they are kind of not really knowing where to start. What would you recommend to them?
Well, as Shawn said at the very beginning, just be yourself, be true to yourself, and be authentic. And the biggest point is to have fun. If you vibe with someone, that's great. And if you don't vibe with someone, there are many fish in the sea. Just have fun.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Shawn, anything from you?
I think that dating apps, the ones that are really popular right now, can be really shallow apps at times. And that they judge people on characteristics that are very surface level. And that goes for anyone. But for us, that does mean you may get judged on your blindness. And I would say that don't be disheartened by that. Maybe dating apps aren't the right thing for you at this time. And if you do want to do it, then have fun. I started using dating apps because I wanted to be like everyone else in a good way. I just wanted to have fun, and I wanted to, it was something that everyone used in college. And so it was something that was fun for me. So with a little more work, you can do that. And if you want to, you should.
Perfect. Well, thank you guys so much for joining. And I bet all our listeners at home took away some great knowledge.
Thank you to our special guests, Shawn Abraham and Rachel Wee. This episode was created and produced by Seyoon Choi and Kinshuk Tella, hosted by Seyoon Choi and co-hosted by Manahil Jafri, with the help of Sarah Luna and Zalea Liebert out of the National Association of Blind Students Content Creation Committee. Visit us on the web for all things blind student resource at nabslink.org. Visit us on Facebook at facebook.com/nabspage. And for all other social media, the handle is @nabslink. Thanks for listening.